Hello, this is Jamey on Sunday, June 10th, and this is my Sunday sit-down video, more casual discussion about a topic and a little bit more in-depth than normal than my normal my favorite game mechanism videos. And in only one take, so there might be weird stumbles and mistakes. The other day on Facebook, I think, someone suggested that I talk about analysis paralysis, and I thought that might be an interesting topic for Sunday sit-down. And if you ever have any ideas for Sunday sit-down chats, feel free to let me know. I'm happy to talk about pretty much anything. So analysis paralysis, if you're not familiar with the term, means it refers to a moment, or that may stretch into longer than a moment, that a gamer has, or that anyone playing a game has, that means that your brain kind of freezes with the decision options that you have, the decision space, and you take a long time to take your turn, to make a decision in the game. This is something that I'm guessing that we have all experienced at some point, where even if the game is going along pretty smoothly, we're taking quick turns. At some point, I'm sure we've all experienced that moment where we're just kind of overwhelmed with decisions, or maybe we have a really important decision to take, and it takes us longer than normal to make that decision. So today I'm going to talk about my opinion about analysis paralysis, because I do have an opinion about it. It might be a little controversial. And I'll talk about games that might encourage it a little bit. I have a few games that inspired this discussion in particular. And I will talk about some mechanisms that I believe discourage analysis paralysis, or AP as I may call it in the discussion. It's the same thing. And some ideas of what you might do if you have someone in your group, or if you find that you yourself are an analysis paralysis player. So let's start with my opinion. So it is my opinion that analysis paralysis is a personal choice, or it can be a personal choice. And I'll explain what I mean by that. Because I'm not saying that players actively choose to have AP, but rather I think players who have AP are actively choosing not to address it. And I think that's a problem, because I think that if you are doing something in your gaming group or in any gaming session that truly has a negative impact on the overall experience of everyone else at the table, I think it is your job, I think it's your responsibility to do something about it, to address that in yourself. I think we all take responsibility for ourselves, not for the other people at the table, but for yourselves. And I'll give an example of this. I was playing Feast for Odin the other night, and I was taking pretty quick turns for a game that I'll talk about this more in a second, but Feast for Odin is a game that definitely can encourage analysis paralysis. And I had an important decision to make pretty late in the game, and I had that moment of analysis paralysis where I realized, I was aware that I was taking much longer than I should have to take a turn. And this was impacting everyone else at the table because they were ready to take their turns. I was slowing the game down because of my indecisiveness. And so I just took a turn. Once I was aware of that, so I could have made a choice. I had a choice there. I could have said, okay, I will continue to slow down the game, or I will just take a turn. I will make a decision, and be content with the fact that it might not be the 100% optimal decision that I could have made, but in this moment with my friends when we're playing a game, I can be happy with this decision that I'm going to make, and I can be happy with the fact that I have stopped impeding the experience of my friends at the table. I'm starting with this because I believe that any person who chooses not to have analysis paralysis can have it in any game. I was looking at all the games on my shelf. You can see some of them in the video here. And every single game, no matter how good of a job the designer did at discouraging analysis paralysis, every game can give players the potential to have it if there's any space in that game for players to make a decision. In Chutes and Ladders, there's no analysis paralysis because it's pure luck. You know, you're just rolling the dice and moving on the board. It's pure luck. And so there's no chance for analysis paralysis there unless someone just refuses to roll the dice. But even then, that isn't really a decision. That's just being a jerk. But in every other game where there's a decision, it has the potential for analysis paralysis. And so I would highly encourage you, if you're the type of person who feels like you have analysis paralysis, I would suggest that I'll talk about some solutions in a minute, but I would really suggest that you look at how you are impacting the other people at the table and try to actively make choices so that you stop impeding that experience of everyone else, because I really think it can have a negative impact on everyone's experience of playing the game. Okay, that's my opinion about analysis paralysis. Now I'll talk about a few games that inspired this discussion. One, I posted this on Instagram the other day. I played Tzolk'in last weekend. One of my favorite games. It's been on my top 10 for a long time now. I love Tzolk'in. And I was actually a little surprised that people on Instagram mentioned that they have a lot of analysis paralysis when they play this game, or they've seen other players have analysis paralysis. Because in my mind, because of the cost of placing your workers in Tzolk'in, your options are somewhat limited. But I think the analysis paralysis comes into Tzolk'in because time is used as a resource. I don't know if I'll pull it out of the box here. Yeah, it's not really handy. Oh, it actually is kind of handy. But in Tzolk'in, you have these wheels that you're moving along. Never played Tzolk'in. I highly recommend it. But you have these wheels that you place workers on, and the workers stay on the wheel as long as you want. And as the game progresses, the benefits that you would get from those workers, because you gain the benefits when you pull the workers off the board, the benefits get better. And so I think this can create analysis paralysis, because if you are trying to plan ahead in this game and plan very precisely ahead, then you have a ton of options. Even though your options for that moment are very limited. If you try to plan too far ahead and think, okay, this is the exact moment where I'm going to pull off this worker and this other worker, this is the exact moment where I need to place this worker and that worker, it can really slow the game down. The other game I mentioned before is A Feast for Odin. These are two sample games among many games that can potentially have analysis paralysis. Actually, I mentioned one other type of game in a second. But A Feast for Odin has, I believe, 61 worker placement spots on the board, which is a lot. And they are almost all viable and possible at all times. It's not like there are seasons where you can only use some and not others. All 61 are possible if you have enough workers to use them, because they're placed in columns. And I think this is what Uwe Rosenberg did to discourage analysis paralysis, because there's a column where you can place one worker, and I think there's 61 divided by 4, about, I guess, 14 or 15 options in that column. That's for one worker. Then there's a 2-worker column, and a 3-worker column, and a 4-worker column. So early on in the game, when you start out with, I think, 6 or 7 workers, even with 6 or 7 workers, you could feasibly take a 4-worker action early in the game, but the game kind of discourages it. It's more built towards later in the game when you have a lot of workers, then those 4-worker, 3-worker actions become a big deal, and you might use them more often because you have more workers to spare. But it is still 61 actions that you can take at any time if you have the available workers, and it can be a lot. That's the kind of thing that I can think can freeze anyone's mind, but particularly someone who is prone to analysis paralysis. So those are 2 examples. The third example, I think, is any game, and this is a type of game that I talk about in any format, games that have menus or checklists of actions, because it can just cause this certain level of brain burn where the game isn't guiding you in any way. It's just saying at any time you can do any of this stuff, and that can cause some analysis paralysis for players. So here are some things that I think that games can do, game designers and games can do to discourage analysis paralysis. One is to give players really short, streamlined turns. So turns where instead of having action point allowance is a common thing in games where you have a bunch of action points and you can spend them as you wish. And that ties into this thing of menus and checklists in games where you have 4 action points and you can spend them doing 4 different actions or 3 different actions. That can I think sometimes impede games, opposed to games where they just say, okay, you're doing this one thing on your turn. You have these choices and you're doing this one thing. Do that one thing. Like in A Feast for Odin, you're only doing one thing on your turn. You're choosing one action. Obviously, a lot of these things that I'm about to list, they work together. By themselves, they may not work out all that well. So that's one thing. Give players a short, streamlined decision thing. One thing they can do on their turn, maybe 2. The next one on my list is to give players... Actually, no, I'll skip ahead. The other one I would say is limiting players' options, the viable options a player can take take on any given turn. And I think deck builders do this really well. In Dominion, say, or I'll use a more modern one, Clank. In Clank, you have, I believe, it's either 8 or 9 cards that you could buy on your turn. But the cost of those cards limits your decision space on any given turn. So especially early in the game, as you're kind of getting into the flow of the game, you might look out on that splay of cards and see, okay, 3 of them, there are only 3 of them that I can even afford right now. So that's a way of a game saying, okay, all these options are going to be here, they're going to be visible for you, but at any given time, only a few of them may actually be possible for you to use or for you to take. I'll use some of my games as examples because I really do focus on analysis paralysis in my games. In Viticulture, the actions are broken down by season. So like in the original game board, the main game board, you have these summer actions where you can place workers, or you have winter actions where you can place workers. And so instead of having them all mashed together, having 12 different actions and a bunch of different action spots, action spaces at any given time, instead you're limited to 6 actions, which can help you hone in and focus. So I like games that do this. A bunch of games on my shelf do this. Like Concordia gives you a limited number of actions in your turn that you can use, and those actions actually diminish as you play because you're playing cards out of your hand. You have fewer actions to use on your turn. Kemet does a similar thing. Kemet gives you this this pyramid of actions. So at the beginning of each round, you have, I believe, 6 actions that you can take, maybe a few more. And as the round continues, you have fewer and fewer actions that you can take because you've used up those actions. I think this way of limiting, or this idea of limiting players to the actions they can take, or giving players just a limited range of viable actions at any given time, like in deck builders, is a good way to limit AP. Another way is to give players either short-term goals or long-term hidden goals, or personal goals, or even global goals. I think Terra Mystica does this really well. Terra Mystica doesn't have hidden goals, but it does, at each round, it has specific things that it highlights. It says, if you have a certain number of, if you're on this level of the cult track, gain this. Or every time this round, when you do this, gain an extra 2 points. That gives analysis paralysis players, or really any players, anyone learning the game. A lot of these things tie to just when you're learning the game, to help you guide you through the game. You can just focus on that thing for that round. The round the game is saying, hey, if you want to, you're going to get bonus points this round for digging, for terraforming. You might want to think about doing that. That way the game doesn't force you to do it, but it just encourages you to do it. Another thing, actually, Terra Mystica does really well is it gives you actions that are there's a limited range of limited actions in Terra Mystica. Oh, we're about to get a bitty appearance. Excuse the blockage in about 2 seconds. There we go. So in Terra Mystica, there are a few actions on the board that can only be taken once per round by any player. You spend power to use them, and they're better than the other versions of those actions in the game. So I think by having a limited range of them, Terra Mystica says at the beginning of each round, hey, you might want to think about doing this thing right away because other players might take it. I think that's a good move. Another thing is in like Lords of Waterdeep, where you have hidden goals. So in Lords of Waterdeep, it can be overwhelming when you look at the quests that you can choose, the face-up quest on the board. But it does something really clever, where at the beginning of the game you get a hidden goal, a hidden Lord of Waterdeep that says, hey, at the end of the game, you're going to get 4 points for every version of like the military quest that you accomplish and this other quest that you accomplish. So that gives you a little bit of focus when you're looking at those quests to think, okay, I'm going to be looking for that quest type. That's going to narrow my options a little bit. I'm not forced to do it, but the game is encouraging me to do it so that I'm not caught up in like mathing through all the different combinations and possibilities for all these cards. I have two more little things here. One is to help players plan their turns in advance. So this is something that doesn't necessarily counter analysis paralysis, but rather it gives players the potential to have that paralysis while it's not their turn. And so by the time it gets to them, they have been able to plan their turn. So basically the idea behind this is to not change the game state so much between my current turn, and the next time I take a turn, so that during that downtime, I can plan what I'm going to do. There are certain games, Five Tribes actually. Five Tribes is a great example of not doing this well, because in Five Tribes it is almost impossible to plan your turn in advance. Because it's very precise in the way that you use this. It's this Mancala board, but all players are using the same Mancala, and anything, even the slightest change, can completely change the Mancala that you're going to choose on your turn. So it's very, very difficult to plan your turn in advance. You can try, and you can maybe have a backup plan, but it's very difficult to do. So I do like games where there's interaction between the players, but maybe it's a little bit more passive, and it is not impossible to plan your turn in advance. The last thing is, I don't even know what category this fits into, but I'll give the example. In Scythe, there is a variant that says if a player is basically it says if a player is wasting everyone's time by calculating each player's current score so that they can make an optimal decision, that player loses. I think it's like they lose 2 popularity. It's a variant. You don't have to play with this, but it's greatly discouraging someone from doing this calculation that can really slow the game down. Because inside, you never really know everyone's score. You can look around the table and see how many coins they have, but there's this popularity, there's this calculation you have to do at the end of the game. And so I wanted to give the game a formal way to say if someone, uses this information that they have to significantly slow down the game, you have a mechanism now that you can actually stop that from happening, because I greatly want to discourage that from happening as a designer. So those are some of my ideas for design elements that can prevent analysis paralysis. Finally, I'm going to end with what you can do in your gaming group, or what maybe I can do. I don't know if I can suggest this to you, but these are just ideas for what you can do if you have analysis paralysis players in your group. And if you yourself are an analysis paralysis player, I would recommend what I said before. Be aware of it. Be aware of how you're impacting everyone's experience, and give yourself almost an internal clock. In my mind, it's usually about 15 to 20 seconds. If I get past that amount of time when it's my turn, I suddenly become aware that I'm taking too much time, and I give myself maybe another 10 seconds to just make a decision. Make a decision that I'm happy with, that I'm content with. I know it's maybe not the best decision, but I'm happy with it, and I take it, and the game moves along. So maybe have that internal clock. If you actually need a timer, you can use a sand timer to help yourself with that. But I'd highly recommend that you make this choice for yourself, because it can create some awkward situations. Like one of the things that I don't want to suggest, just because it's a little weird, is to take someone aside at your game group and say, hey, you're really impacting the group. You're hurting the experience for everyone. That's a discussion that most people don't want to have with someone else. I think that can be a little awkward. I admire you if you're able to have that discussion with someone else in your gaming group in a healthy way, that doesn't impact your relationship with that person. But I think it's tough to do. So the main suggestion that I have is to make it more of a candid, have a more candid approach to addressing it. So if you do have someone in your group who has AP and you want to address it, don't make fun of them, but make light of the situation a little bit. Make some jokes around it. And again, you're not doing this to put them down or to hurt their feelings. And for the wrong people, for certain people, you may not be able to do this at all. But I think there are moments where you can joke about it. And that might help the person become a little aware of it. And as part of the jokes, you might be able to make little suggestions. So you might be able to point out, hey, maybe you could use your hidden gold to make a decision. Or, hey, this round you get extra points for doing this. Like, point out the things that the game does to help them make a decision. And that might help them focus. And it also might just make them aware that they are slowing things down, because they really might not be aware of it. I had one other idea there as I was talking. I'll give an example. So this isn't AP, but this is something that I do in my group, and my group has ended up making fun of me for it. And as a result, I've become aware of it, and I've tried not to do it as often. But the thing that I often do is, if the person to my right taking their turn, the previous person is taking their turn, and I realize that it's something that does not impact my turn at all, and that my turn won't impact their decision on their turn, like as they're finishing up with their turn, I will often just start to take my turn, which some people don't mind, but some people do. And so my group has kind of made fun of me a few times for doing this. And I've taken it in good light, like good humor. It's just a joke, but also they are suddenly telling me, hey, Jamey, we are sometimes annoyed when you do this. And so I've become aware of that, and I've tried to stop doing it as often, or at least to be a little bit more considerate about it. So I might ask someone, hey, are you done your turn? Or is it okay if I go ahead and do this since I don't think it's going to affect anything in this turn? Or I just stop doing it. So that's a way that my group is I can't even remember specific jokes about it. I think they've just said, oh, he's doing a Jamey now, and that has helped me become more aware of it. So that's one approach that you might, or maybe the approach that you can use to address analysis paralysis players in your group. Anyway, I've covered a lot of different stuff about this topic. I know I've gone on for 20 minutes here. I'm sorry for going on so long. But if you have any thoughts about analysis paralysis, either how you've dealt with it personally or with other people in your group, or things in games that you think game designers can do to help discourage AP, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. Or anything else related to this topic, I'd love to hear about that as well. Thank you for joining me this Sunday, and I will see you later in the week for my favorite game mechanism, or next Sunday for the next sit down. Take care.